Hi, friend, and welcome back to Elaborations with Skellington Grin, the multifaceted spiritual podcast where we uncover the nuances, the science behind spirituality, and so much more. And if you are new here, I am Ava, your gothic witch big sis on this journey. Today's episode is a little bonus riff on something that I recently wrote about on Medium, and you can find the link to the polished essay version of this in the description box if you want the more reader-friendly version of this. But if you're ready to listen to your girl ramble, get ready and buckle in. But before we go any further, I want to give y'all a little bit of real talk because I am recording this just a few hours before it goes live. I have been riding some hormonal mood swings and chronic pain waves lately, but I still wanted to show up for all of you and admittedly for myself as well. Because sharing these insights, stories, and tangled thoughts with you feels so important and feels aligned with my sole purpose to connect with others who are wanting to expand their knowledge of spirituality and expand their knowledge of the nuances. And I really do enjoy what I do here on this podcast. But I wanted to give y'all that little disclaimer so that you can bear with me if I riff a little bit more than usual, because you are catching me in this unfiltered, midday, low on caffeine version of my brain. But I really still wanted to hop onto the mic today. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So here is what has been on my mind. And this isn't really something totally new. It's probably been happening for a lot longer than I've been able to observe it, but there is this strange pipeline that I've noticed. And if you're listening to this podcast, maybe you have seen it too. There are people out there who get super into New Age spirituality, the modern westernized versions of Reiki, tarot, manifestation, meditation, yoga, and Ayurvedic medicine. And they suddenly start to swing hard into evangelical beliefs and fundamentalist Christianity. And when they do, it is not usually this quiet personal shift, but it's more like a full-blown rebrand and an overhaul. Everything they used to love is now demonic, and everyone still practicing it is in danger of hellfire and spiritual warfare. And listen, faith shifts are totally normal. And I will never have any issue with people changing paths or with people having different beliefs from me. I am so open to different things, and I'm open to other people's beliefs challenging my own. But what gets me is that when these changes come along, they often come with condemnation, where initial curiosity turns into judgment and what was once sacred is suddenly evil. Now, for those of you who might be near my age or have any family members who grew up in the 80s, 90s, and early aughts, you may be familiar with the 1998 Adam Sandler film, The Waterboy. In this film, there is a character named Helen Mama Boucher, who is played by Kathy Bates, and she is in the film, she is Adam Sandler's mama. And she calls everything the devil, including education. And to me, that's what these pipeliners sound like. They sound like they off they nut. All right. But moving on, I want to share a little personal story with you guys. So I had a friend who started moving back towards Christianity. And at first I didn't think much of it because faith is completely personal and we're all allowed to explore and reorient. And she was still combining a lot of spiritual beliefs with the fact that she was also becoming a little bit more attuned with Christ. But over time, things shifted so dramatically that it gave me spiritual friendship whiplash, okay? And one day it really hit the ceiling. She was on a live stream video that she was doing on her social media, and suddenly she was talking about things in this different light, where manifestation was narcissism, tarot and witchcraft were the devil's work, and even mental health struggles were demonic possession. Waking up at specific times in the night was also apparently super demonic. And that is when my jaw really hit the floor, because I was like, wait, hold on. You have known me for years, and you know that I still do tarot. I talk about manifestation. I'm into spirituality practices. I manifest. I wake up at 3 a.m. sometimes. Sometimes I wake up at 4:44. So what are we saying here? And I started questioning, and I was like, am I a narcissistic possessed witch? Honestly, that might sound like a great Halloween costume, but as a worldview, I have more of a hard pass on that than I do on eating tripe, and that's saying a lot. But I even asked her in the comment section of this video, I was like, so what are you saying? That because I still read tarot, I'm into manifestation, I'm into studying and practicing the laws of the universe, such as the law of polarity, the law of attraction, the law of assumption, the law of vibration, I'm a narcissist? And she didn't directly answer me. She actually kind of skirted around it. And I was like, you know what? I'm fed up. I'm not going to listen to this bullshit anymore. But the hardest part of this, and the most asinine part of this, was when she started saying that her own family members' obvious mental health struggles weren't anxiety or depression or even the effects of dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder and having maybe borderline personality disorder or even bipolar disorder. She started calling all of that possession. And that is where I had to really take a step back, because that is not showing compassion. That is what we like to call spiritual bypassing, and that is fear wearing a halo. And we don't do that here. And since we're here, let's talk about that whole 3 a.m. thing. You've probably seen TikTok reels and Instagram posts and so much on social media and YouTube and all of that, where if you wake up at 3:33 a.m., it's a sign of demonic possession. Baby, no. There are also so many videos out there that talk about the different nuances of spirituality with waking up at certain times, especially if you're waking up at times like 3 a.m., 3:33 a.m., 4:44 a.m., and it's aligned with what we like to call angel numbers. But those mirrored numbers are sometimes the universe's way of showing you signs and synchronicities, or showing you things that you might not be fully observing or taking in. Okay? But when we're waking up between 3 and 4 a.m., sometimes it's because of cortisol spikes. Sometimes it is your bladder reminding you that you should not have chugged water before bed. Sometimes we're waking up due to stress or trauma replaying itself in our nervous systems. And while I'm not a neuroscientist, it doesn't take a PhD to figure this out. A simple Google search, yes, Google, not ChatGPT, and some critical thinking skills will lead you straight to reputable sources explaining why our sleep cycles cause us to wake up at certain times. And neuroscience has all of the receipts. So I highly encourage you to do a quick Google search, to go find different reputable scholarly articles on this, and it will blow your mind. But if we want to bring this into the spiritual side, which I always do, sometimes waking up in the middle of the night, like I said, is spirit or the universe reaching out through your dreamscape and nudging you to pay attention. Dreams are where the subconscious whispers, and sometimes those whispers are loud enough to shake you awake. And this happens to me all the time. My dreamscape is basically its own midnight podcast, uncensored, symbolic, and occasionally a little chaotic. But bottom line, you are not possessed. You are simply processing everything from external stimuli to trauma to cortisol spikes to relational issues and so much more. When you're waking up in the middle of the night, it is simply your body trying to process what's happening in your waking life, okay? Which brings me to another aspect of spirituality and talking about dark feminine and dark energies and working with them. I think I've talked about this in another episode before, but if I haven't, I am someone who works with multiple different deities because, yes, I am a witch and I do practice witchcraft. And I work with different deities across different pantheons that are actually open to me, like the Norse pantheon, the Mexican folk tradition, because I am half Latina, and the Celtic pantheon. Okay. So I work with several different deities and goddesses and gods that might be considered a little bit darker, a little bit more intense. And those include, but are not limited to, Odin, Freya, the Morrigan, and so many others. But another one that I actually do work with, and I have started to work with a little bit more as I'm trying to balance my feminine embodiment, is Lilith. But people, including this older friend, loved to warn me about not working with her because she is bad energy and she is evil and she is the devil's wife. And I'm just like, pause. Lilith is not evil, but she is the embodiment of what we consider to be dark feminine. And dark feminine doesn't necessarily mean evil or demonic or possessed, but it does mean that she symbolizes a refusal to shrink. Because she was initially, and there are several iterations, but I like to go back to this one. I can't remember which iteration it was, whether it was Judaism or it was something else, but she was initially Adam's wife. And she looked at him and said, actually, no, I'm not laying beneath you and acting like I am lesser than you just because you say so. I value equality. I want to be at the same level as you. And for that, she was cast out of paradise. And then we have the story of Adam and Eve being made from Adam's rib and her being his new wife. And then they had Cain and Abel, and Eve was also tempted by Lucifer in the garden and, ate from the tree of knowledge. But we can go into this another time in another episode, and I might actually start, pulling some legitimate theological resources, but it wasn't a snake. It wasn't an apple. It was so much more nuanced than that. But we'll get to that another time. But the reason I'm really talking about this is because the shadow doesn't necessarily mean demonic. Shadow simply means something that we have repressed. And I want to be completely honest with you. Your shadow side and doing shadow work, which was initially coined by a psychologist, actually, someone who was studying fundamental psychology and someone who is one of the founding fathers of what we know as psychology today, Carl Jung, founded the practice of shadow work. He was the first person, at least on record, to have really spoken about what shadow work is. And shadow work and working with the shadow and integrating the shadow does not mean that you are working with things that are demonic. It simply means that you are opening yourself up to integrating and forgiving yourself for things that you have repressed. And you are looking at yourself as a whole human being instead of a human who is meant to mask and hide and feel guilty for who they are. Sometimes shadow work allows you to open up the door to saying, yes, I am gay, and instead of trying to pretend that you're not. Sometimes shadow work is opening yourself up to forgiving yourself for things that you did in the past that might have been a little bit negative. Or shadow work can even help you to work through relationship trauma, such as being in an abusive relationship and all of the things that you allowed that other person to let you believe about yourself, and the ways in which you allowed somebody else to break you down so fundamentally that you became a husk of yourself. But anything that we repress doesn't just go away. It sneaks back in. And sometimes it's probably wearing hotter boots and sharper eyeliner wings. But, the shadow does not necessarily mean anything bad. It just means things that we are trying to get away from. And the more that we get away from those things, the more they creep up on us and they actually feel like something worse. And that's why we tend to call those things our inner demons. But really, they're just the other layers of us that we have not given enough attention to be able to heal. But another truth bomb is this: you cannot embrace the nurturing, receptive, light aspects of spirituality, especially feminine energy or even masculine energy, which we've talked about in other episodes, without also honoring the dark. Lilith energy, Loki energy, Lucifer energy, all of that is energy that says no to the things that are blocking you. Energy that actually claims equality and demands personal sovereignty. And sovereignty amongst others, where you're able to own your autonomy, you're able to own yourself, you're able to own your integrity and your dignity. And you're able to be treated with the utmost respect because you're giving other people the utmost respect. And while we're in Genesis territory, here's my hot take on Eve. I said I would talk about this a little bit more in another episode, and we will. But the usual story says that she was tempted by the serpent and tricked into sin. But what if the temptation was really just the first time someone actually asked her, "Are you happy and do you want more?" And what if that voice that Lucifer was awakening in herself was her self-awareness? Because in that case, Eve wasn't doomed, she was evolving. And she was stepping into consciousness even if it meant leaving paradise. And maybe paradise was never supposed to last forever. But paradise is what we keep rebuilding every time we choose to know ourselves more deeply. Again, we're going to dive into that in another episode, maybe in the future when I get a little bit more resources to really talk about theology and things like that, because I do not want this to be a theology podcast, but I am open to talking about several different topics here because I want this to be well-rounded and I want us to actually have a legitimate basis for things. But this is why I think it is important to understand this, because this thinking, I think, is why people swing from New Age spirituality, and I'm going to call it New Age spirituality because spirituality has been around for a lot longer than the New Age, but New Age spirituality has been crafted in such a way that it's kind of more of like the watered down version of a lot of things and the westernized version of a lot of things. But a lot of people swing back from New Age into fundamentalism because of certainty. Certainty is like that weighted blanket for the anxious soul. Because rules sometimes feel safer than mystery. It is so much simpler to say, that is God's work, this over here is the devil's work, case closed. It's so much simpler to do that than it is to allow yourself to notice the nuances and the paradoxes. It is so much simpler to live sometimes in certainty than it is to live in, drumroll please, actual truth. It is. But here's the thing. Certainty is not always truth. Just because you may have certainty over something does not mean that you cannot question it and build a new sense of certainty for yourself. Certainty, however, is very tidy, but the truth is actually a lot messier. Truth lives and breathes and survives in paradox. Truth asks us to integrate shadow and light, science and spirit, Eve and Lilith, Lucifer and Adam. And that is a much scarier, but also a much braver and more rewarding path. So to close out, if you have noticed this pipeline too, or maybe even felt yourself pulled towards it, I invite you now to pause and ask yourself, are you searching for truth or are you searching for certainty? Because one invites you to integrate your shadow and the other just keeps you chasing dogma. As far as me, I'm going to take the paradox. I'm going to take the paradox as if it's a new Birkin bag and, finally buy it. All right? I don't have Birkin bag money right now, but you know what I mean. And I'll take the mystery because I'll take the messy, because to me the messy is a gorgeous dance of light and shadow, Lilith and Eve, neuroscience and dreamscape, science and spirit, because that feels more whole and it feels more holistic and it feels more balanced. So, as always, thank you for letting me elaborate with you today. And if you want to see the essay version of this, check the link to my Linktree, which is in the description box of this episode. And if this resonated, feel free to share it with friends who are also navigating their own spiritual paradoxes. Until next time, keep questioning, keep integrating, and as always, keep elaborating. This has been another enlightening episode of Elaborations with Skellington Grin, and I will see you next time. Bye!